forward, one of the debates we'll probably want to start having a bit more is this idea of transparency, which Andy brought up, and labeling. And one of the interesting things on my mind lately has been this idea that we're not providing consumers with enough information about the products that we're actually delivering to them. And earlier this year, I noticed a bit of an odd trend amongst some of my friends, just some of people that I interact with on Instagram or Twitter, and it was alcohol abstinence. I describe this trend as odd simply because more than a few of the folks that I'm associated with who were actively avoiding alcohol, I would affectionately describe as, they were lushes. So it was really weird to see some of my friends kicking the booze for a full month. And some of you might know this as a dry January. I think it's a trend in the UK, it started in the UK. There's now 2 million people over there in the UK doing it, a dry January. So it left me with some questions. How many people are participating in this, and what the hell is it doing to beer sales? And the short answer is that I still don't know. But the good news is that my friends at Nielsen were kind enough to kind of stumble down a road with me and trust my gut instinct and co-develop a survey with us about the habits of health-conscious consumers, and the results for which Danelle Kosmal, the VP of their beverage alcohol practice, is here to share with you today. So the idea was simple. Let's learn more about the relationship between health and beer consumption and try to understand things like nutritional labeling and exercise goals and how that would impact purchase behavior. And we got some pretty interesting stuff back. So Danelle is going to share all the results of that survey now, as well as some others that she's done in the past. But here's one stat I'd encourage you all to pay special attention to as she's presenting, and especially as this conversation around label transparency continues to evolve. 78% of monthly craft beer drinkers believe it is important to read nutritional labels when buying food and beverages. So think about that as Danelle presents right now. Come on up.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks. So let me just start off and ask, how many people would consider themselves to be healthy or a health-conscious person? All right, so we're on track. So for those of you who don't know me, it's really great to be back at Brewbound. I'm Danelle Kosmal. I'm with Nielsen. I'm part of what we call our beverage alcohol practice, so it's a pretty good gig. I talk about beer, wine, and spirits, and beer is probably my favorite. So Chris gave some background on why we're doing this and how the conversation started, at least with this. And I have to admit, when we first started talking about it, I was like, really, Chris? Like health and beer? We're going to have a whole session on this? Because I was all ready to come in and do the Nielsen thing and talk about how craft is performing in the 17 different ways that we want to look at it and everything else. And the more we started talking about it, the more I got it. And the reality is, like, why are we talking about this? Well, the conversation already started. So if we think about Diageo last year made their announcement that they're voluntarily going to put nutritional labels on their packages. Miller Coors a couple years ago said they're starting with Miller 64 and then moving on to a few other brands. And the wine industry is following suit as well. So the conversation definitely has started. So what I'm going to talk about today. First, just a quick overview on what's happening in health and wellness with the US consumer. Not necessarily related to beer, wine, or spirits, but just what's happening with health and wellness in the consumer. And then we're going to answer, is the craft beer drinker a health-conscious drinker? And then finally talk through some ways that BevAl drinkers are trying to find balance in drinking alcohol and also maintaining a healthy lifestyle. So first, that overview of what's happening with consumers in the US. Well, first, people want to become more engaged. People want more information. They want to know, we all want to know what we're taking into our bodies. And a lot of it is about ways to find information. Technology is a big part of that. And nutrition. Nutrition and food and beverage is also a big part of that. And people are saying they're more concerned about their diets. And it isn't anymore about the number of calories that we're taking in necessarily, it's about the quality. And I think what's interesting here is there are some words that ring true and align closely with the craft beer industry. So things like quality over price, and that people are willing to pay more for something healthy. And, and I'll speak a little bit more about technology in a couple slides, but technology is still a big part of this. We continue to want to seek more and more information, and along with that information is sharing and understanding fitness tips and sharing recipes and things like that. Trust and transparency. So Chris gave me probably like a 15-second overview of what Andy was going to talk about, and I do think it's interesting that even when we're talking about general trends of health and wellness, we're starting to see some similar themes. So things about trust, things about transparency, that's what's important to consumers, and it's really important when they're thinking about health and wellness. So 65% of Americans say they read labels on packaging. And then also, they're still looking for brands that they trust. So over half of Americans say they're buying from producers that they trust. Even with all of this information, and even though we're all reading a lot more of nutrition labels, people still have an issue in trusting everything that they read. And so only 37% of Americans said that they trust the health claims on packages. And I was telling a colleague that yesterday when I was at the airport, I picked up a bag of kale chips, which is like the most ridiculous, I think I'm being healthy by eating kale chips. And plastered on it was every icon you could imagine of USDA organic, non-GMO, naturally gluten-free, and we're inundated with all of this information to the point where now I feel like I need to do even more research to figure out what's really true. And technology, of course, is a big part of it too. About 3/4 of Americans are sharing all of their health and wellness tips on Facebook. Also sharing a lot on Instagram, on Twitter. We've seen a lot of increased activity in the past 2 years on Instagram and Twitter, and Pinterest also. And even though technology is a big part of it, a lot of it comes down to the trust of people that you know. And so over half of Americans, 54%, said that friends and family are the greatest influence when they're making their health decisions. So I think that's also a part, and interesting as we continue this conversation about health and beer and health and craft beer. Beer is such a social industry, and our friends and family are a big part of that. So Nielsen has a partnership with another marketing research company. It's called Natural Marketing Institute. And in partnership with them, we look at how consumers are segmented on different ranges of healthiness, right? So we have 5 different groups that we look at. And the far left is well-beings. So those are the healthiest groups. And down to the eat, drink, and be merries. And those are the people that probably don't necessarily care as much about health. And we have these segments, and with these segments, we understand we have people who are in their house scanning everything that they purchase. So we know exactly what they're purchasing. And when we look at when people are buying beer, wine, and spirits, we can have a good idea of which of these consumer segments, from healthiest to not so healthy, are buying different types of BevAl products. So the first I'll start with is the beer, FMB, and cider category overall, which for the most part can be represented by and interpreted as kind of your mainstream beer and FMB and cider. What's interesting about that is those eat, drink, and be merry, so the people that don't care as much about health necessarily are the ones that are definitely purchasing more than their fair share of beer. The difference there is once we start to look at the craft beer consumer, that's where that less engaged, less healthy group isn't buying as much craft beer. We start to see a lot higher purchase ranges with those higher, the groups that are a little bit more healthy. Another thing is, as we continue the conversation with wine and spirits, wine is historically the segment that we've most often associated with healthy consumers. And as we walk through some of the results from this survey, you'll start to see some similarities of wine and craft beer. But in this case, when we do look at individual purchase and actual purchase, those well-being, so the most healthy consumers, are purchasing more than their fair share of wine. The whole reason I'm giving you some of this background is this is a really good representation of what's happening today in terms of what people are actually doing in their purchases. Sometimes when we do surveys, what people say and what they do are a little bit different. And surveys can represent more of the aspirational ideas of what people want to do with their lives. And this is a really good representation of how people are actually making their purchases today. The next question is the craft beer drinker a health-conscious drinker? According to Thomas Jefferson, beer, if drunk in moderation, softens the temper, cheers the spirit, and promotes health. So we kind of wanted to ask some Americans today what they thought about health and beer. And so that's how we started the conversation with Chris and developed this custom survey. And just a little bit of background on it. We fielded it through Nielsen, Harris. It's an online survey. We developed the custom questions in partnership with Brewbound. It's very recent. It's very new data. We fielded it a couple weeks ago in May. We had a little over 1,300 respondents, all 21 plus, who said that they drink beer, wine, or spirits at least several times a year. And then of that 1,300 plus group, we have a subsegment of what we're calling monthly craft beer drinkers. So 405 people who said that they drink craft beer at least once per month. And just a reminder that this is a national representation. And a couple other notes as I go through some of the results. Anytime I'm referring to craft beer drinkers, in most cases, it's a monthly craft beer drinker. So it's anybody that said that they drink craft beer at least once a month, probably more. We wanted to make sure that we were excluding some of those people that might just drink craft beer once or twice a year. So this is much more representative of kind of the true craft beer drinker. And in the same way, anytime I'm mentioning wine drinker or spirit drinker, in most cases, it's the monthly wine drinker and the monthly spirit drinker. And also keep in mind, those groups are not mutually exclusive. I am a person that would be a monthly craft beer drinker, a monthly non-craft beer drinker, a monthly wine drinker, and a monthly spirit drinker. I asked at the beginning how many people said they were health conscious. When we asked craft beer drinkers if they're health conscious, 80% of craft beer drinkers say that they're health conscious. So, first, keep in mind that this is an aspirational view. We intentionally did not define health conscious in this case. We just wanted the respondent's perspective. So I might say that I'm a runner because I'll run a half marathon once a year, but it's at an embarrassing slow pace. So a true runner would not consider me to be a runner. But in terms of like my view and the types of activities, I might consider myself to be a runner. In the same case, we just wanted the respondent's perspective of, did they consider themselves to be health conscious? 8 in 10 craft drinkers said they're health conscious. And this is where you're gonna start to see some similarities in terms of health habits, that the craft beer drinker and the wine beer drinker a little similar. One more thing that I'll just add to this is, and I spoke a little bit, I think, to the idea that this is aspirational. So in some cases, when we're asking questions like this, people always want to kind of answer in a slightly more positive way than what might be truly representative of them. So if this number looks to be a little bit inflated, we would expect that. And it's really just taking the idea that these are the aspirations of a craft beer drinker, that they do want a healthy lifestyle. So what specifically makes them healthy? Because we knew that it might be a little bit aspirational, we wanted to ask some specific questions that were better indicators of healthy activities. So things like exercise, nutrition, how they're eating, if they're reading nutrition labels, and how they're managing alcohol in kind of maintaining a healthy lifestyle. The first is exercise. So craft beer drinkers and wine drinkers are most likely to exercise. So when we asked respondents to agree or disagree to the statement, I stay healthy by exercising several times per week, 57% of craft beer drinkers are exercising a couple times a week. Run, train, drink, namaste. So I think this is going to be like my new tagline in some way. What we found was that craft beer drinkers are, when we compare them to their other beer, wine, spirit counterparts, craft beer drinkers are more likely to engage in cardio, and specifically running, biking, swimming, and in strength training, including weightlifting and things like yoga and Pilates. And 32% of craft beer drinkers said that cardio is their favorite form of exercise. So one of the reasons why we wanted to share that is we also asked if respondents would be more likely to attend a brewery-sponsored event if a beverage or tasting was included in the price. And when we looked at millennial craft beer drinkers, 73% said yes. So they want this. They're looking for this from you guys. The monthly craft beer drinkers, 64% said yes. And these are really high when we compare them to your average typical beverage alcohol drinker, which only 37% said yes. And just to add to that, we also wanted to get an indication of, do craft beer drinkers do people like to exercise alone? Are they more into group exercise activities? And 40% said that they prefer group exercises. So this, of course, leads us to the next recommendation and conversation that many and most of you are already doing. What a great way to engage your drinkers. So things like, I did a quick search on races or running and breweries, and 1,000 things came up. So craft brew races, 250 of you are already involved in that. Wine is becoming a big part of it too. I live outside of DC, and there's 5Ks and half marathons in Virginia in the wineries all the time. A lot of yoga at breweries. And this, of everything that I looked at, this was one of my favorites: the mountain pose, the child's pose, downward dog, and reward pose. And then some other ways, Dogfish Head has done this for several years now, I think, in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. So it's engaging drinkers, it's a 5K race, but then also raising money in partnership with the Nature Conservancy for conservation areas around there. I used to work for the Nature Conservancy years ago, so I had to include this one too. Organic, we're still talking about local, natural, organic, but when we asked BevAl drinkers specifically if they go out of their way to purchase organic food and beverages, of the monthly craft beer drinkers, almost half, 46% said yes. Of millennial craft beer drinkers, 66 said they're going out of their way to eat organic food and beverages. So the takeaway here isn't, I'm not recommending that everybody go out and start brewing organic beer. I think it's just interesting for us to recognize the lifestyle that your drinker has, and also just use this as a takeaway in thinking about new and different ways, or continuing to have partnerships and activities for your drinkers. So things like placement for secondary displays in store, food pairings, the type of sponsorships that you have, the types of festivals and events that you're sponsoring. Just keeping in mind that a lot of your drinkers are also really interested in organic food and beverages. And who's most likely to drink local? That would be the craft beer drinker, of course. 27% of monthly craft beer drinkers said that they're seeking local food and beverage, and that's higher than the average BevAl drinker, which was at 21%. Nutrition labels. So Chris already shared one of these with you. We just wanted to understand, are people looking at, and in this case, we're just talking about food and beverages, are people looking at nutrition labels? 78% of the monthly craft beer drinker said that it's really important for them to read nutrition labels on food and beverages that they're purchasing. It's equally important, more or less, with wine, so 79%. The non-craft beer drinker is a little bit less concerned about it at 71%, but still, for the most part, overall, our BevAl drinkers are concerned about reading nutrition labels and understanding and wanting information for what they're consuming. Then specifically about alcohol products, this was a survey that Nielsen fielded last year. It was about a year ago. And we asked drinkers, this was anybody who had beer, wine, or spirits a couple times a year, we asked them, do you want nutritional labels on on your alcohol products. 2/3 said that they would favor that. And then also something interesting, we wanted to understand if and how that potentially could impact their choice in what they're purchasing. And nearly half said that based on the information that they get from the nutrition label, that potentially could impact their choice in what they're purchasing. Just kind of to get an additional sense of transparency and information that people have, one of the first questions we had is, do people even know, do they have an idea of the ranges in calories, especially within beer? Do people know what they're consuming? And it isn't a surprise, probably craft beer drinkers are very knowledgeable and they seek out a lot of information. So 73% of monthly craft beer drinkers said, gave an indication that they know the amount of calories. And so this came from a series of true-false questions or true-false statements. So the respondent just had to say true or false. So the statement in this case was, calorie ranges can vary greatly in craft beer, even within the same style or brand of beer. And so again, nearly 3/4 of the craft beer drinkers answered true, and that was significantly higher than the average Bevel drinker, which said 65%. So how are drinkers finding this balance? First, this was one of the most interesting things for me, is that especially craft beer drinkers have, the way that they perceive alcohol is a little bit different than your average Bevel drinker. Craft beer drinkers see alcohol as a special treat. And this kind of makes sense also. If you think about the environment that the craft beer industry has developed and the experience that you all create for your drinkers and the way that people can experience new styles and flavors and have their favorite beers but still go back and try new ones, it really is very much of an experience, and you've created something that is a special treat for craft beer drinkers. So for that, I would say kudos and continue. But when we look across some of the different types of craft beer drinkers, millennial craft beer drinkers, more than anyone, see alcohol as a special treat. Along the same lines, we wanted to understand, is there a difference in the way that people, are they more likely to indulge at a restaurant versus when they're at home? And definitely, people are more likely to indulge in alcohol when they're out at a restaurant. And it's higher than average among female craft drinkers and Gen X, so that 35 to 44 range, craft beer drinkers. This is one of the second big ahas from this for me was the idea of this weekend warrior craft drinker. When we asked consumers and drinkers if they drink on weekends and only, nearly half of craft beer drinkers said that they drink alcohol on weekends only. And it's a lot higher when we compare it to the rest of Bevel drinkers. So 39% of regular beer, wine, spirit drinkers said that they drink alcohol on weekends only. The next really big and probably concerning thing that we can talk about is the millennial craft beer. So 60% of millennial craft beer drinkers said that they drink alcohol on weekends only. So first, once we start talking about these numbers, the first thing I'll say is this is almost the same idea as when I talked about like the aspirational response, but it might be the opposite, where people might want to hold back a little bit in the way that they're talking about drinking. So they might be drinking a little bit during the week, but maybe they think most of their drinking is happening on the weekends because that's where most of their drinking occasions are actually happening. And when most of their purchasing is happening. So I think it just goes back to, in reality, truly, is it really 60% of millennial craft beer drinkers that are only drinking on weekends? Maybe it's not that high, but what's important for us to remember is that that's the way people are associating most of their drinking. That's the way that they're thinking about their drinking occasions, is on weekends. So what do we do about that? One of the first things is prioritize our events that are happening at the brew pub, the tasting room, in store, prioritize them for the days leading up to the weekend and the weekend. But also, what do we do about the week? This is where we can create and help to create new drinking occasions during the week. And some of those ways can be through group exercises at the pub, health-friendly and social activities, and then heading to the tasting room after that. Anything that can help to be a part of someone's regular weekday evening activity would be a great way to engage. we wanted to understand how people are adjusting their alcohol habits to maintain that healthy lifestyle. And what we learned is it isn't about finding beverages with fewer calories. It's really about drinking less overall. So across all beer, wine, and spirit drinkers, we found that that's the number one way that people are saying they're trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle is they're drinking less. One pretty differentiating factor with a craft beer drinker is that the idea of taking time off from alcohol. So Chris mentioned this, and I have to say in that conversation too, the first conversation I had with him, and he was talking about he has these friends that abstained from drinking in January and February, and I thought, we're gonna have like 2 respondents for this. And it's really strong. We found a pretty significant portion of millennial craft beer drinkers are saying this is a way that they're maintaining their health, is that they're taking time off from drinking. They're doing things like the not drinking for January, not drinking for February, or they're drinking on weekends only. So when I said pretty significant, it's 44% of millennial craft beer drinkers said that they're managing their alcohol habits by taking time off sometimes from drinking. So what does that mean for all of us? Just to recap some of these findings. First, consumers are seeking trust and transparency. I mentioned this before. This aligns with the craft beer industry. You guys are about trust and transparency. You want to share that information, and your drinkers will continue to trust you by sharing that information. Alcohol is a treat, and it's an indulgence. And this is a little bit of a different way in how craft beer drinkers see and view alcohol compared to wine and spirit drinkers. So take advantage of that. Continue to engage your drinkers in a way that you can help to create that special experience for them, because they recognize it and they see alcohol as an indulgent and a treat. And then finally, people are approaching health and wellness in a different way now. So a lot of it, and especially millennial craft beer drinkers, are approaching it in a way that it's about abstinence or a certain period of time when they just might be taking a break from drinking, and also prioritizing weekends for drinking. So I will recognize that Chris is kind of ahead of the trend here and is like the trend spotter for that, but the survey results definitely show that, and I think that can be a continuing conversation of how that might present challenges to all of you, and different ways that you can continue to engage your drinkers, especially during those times when they just might be taking a break from alcohol. So with that, I will thank you. I don't know if...
So we do have a minute just to ask a quick question. So we know that that some of these drinkers are abstaining. We know that they care about nutritional labeling in some of the other products that they're buying. How concerned or how aware should businesses in the beer space be of that discussion around labeling? And as somebody who pays attention to a lot of these trends, what's sort of the risk of, sort of full disclosure for the brewers when, hey, an IPA has 250 calories and the consumer is actually going to see that? How do you think that'll impact the actual purchase?
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things we've tracked from, I think, going back to 2003 and the way that people talk about how they're looking at nutrition labels, and it continues to increase. So more and more year over year, we continue to see people be concerned about what they're consuming, and they want more information. So that naturally will have to translate into the beer, wine, and spirit space sometime soon. I think that is something that we know that people are asking for, and they're going to be happy to see. So is there going to be like a sticker shock in a sense of once they see 250 calories, 300 calories, whatever, in an IPA? Yes and no. I think it goes back to craft beer drinkers are already really well informed. And so they already might have a sense of the amount of calories that are in, one of their regular favorite IPAs. So they might already be making plans to figure that into their lifestyle and their health habits already.
Sure. real quick, what was the most sort of shocking statistic of this survey to you?
Well, I think maybe not shocking, but one of the most fun was just the way that people talked about how it's a special treat. So, and especially that craft beer drinkers see it in a slightly different way. The weekends only is one of the biggest things, and I think it's going to be interesting to see if that trend continues, especially with the millennial craft beer drinker.
Yeah, and certainly a challenge for brewers. I mean, we talked about occasions, trying to get those occasions back even during the week, it seems. Just another challenge for brewers to continue doing that, especially if consumers see it as a treat, if they see craft beer as a treat. It definitely seems like an uphill battle and one more thing for people to consider as they're talking to consumers. Awesome. Well, we have a short 30-minute networking break for you guys. I neglected to mention at the beginning of the program that if you guys do have questions for any of our speakers throughout the day, you can text, tweet, or email them in. It's on the bottom of the agenda, and I'll get them up here on an iPad, so please send them in. And let's go have a